Hey team, Rowyn here. Let's talk about color theory. Color theory is a lot to talk about. There are a lot of different parts. So I'm going to try to break it down to the very, very basic essentials as best as I possibly can. Color theory is about how colors relate to each other and how we relate to color. You can find articles about how yellow makes people happy or hungry, but that'll come down to culture and each individual's experience. Sorry, but there is no catch-all that works for every human being, just as there isn't a set palette that will always look good for every piece of art. Having been said, we can at least look at some rules to help us determine which color combinations will and won't tend to make your eyeballs want to bleed. Also, you may find that a certain set of colors does always work for your specific pieces, like part of your style or your brand, but that's up to you and not up to me. When we talk about color itself, it's hue, saturation, or value. Hue would be the color on the color wheel. Blue, green, red, so on. Saturation is how strong that color is, how faded it is. Value is where we get into pink versus red. A tint is when you add white, and there's a lot of stuff that we aren't really talking about here. Oh, and saturation is different than opacity. You see what I mean? There's a lot. Saturation is how much color is in something. Opacity is how much you can or can't see through something, like if it's watered down. Digitally, that's really easy to show, right? You just see how much you can see of the layer below what you're drawing. In general, you want your darkest color to be the most saturated. What I mean is, here's a dark blue outline and shading. And then yellows and greens. If we make that blue desaturated, a little more gray, it's harder to look at. And as I've said, rules are meant to be broken in art, so you're going to do whatever helps you convey the feeling you're going for. I think it's hard to look at. Personal preference. Maybe you want things to feel like a sad memory. Then you might want to fuzz things up a little. Maybe don't have the contrast be as high. Maybe it's an action scene, or someone is angry. Maybe you want darker, thicker, harsher lines for that. Some of this is going into character design territory, and I'll make a separate video for that. This ultimately comes down to contrast either way. You want to keep contrast in mind when thinking about coloring your piece. An easy way to check this is to desaturate the whole thing. Make everything black and white. If you see too many parts that are the same value, work on making one of them more saturated, or futz with it another way, until you get that look you're going for. When I work on House Factorable, I'm working entirely in black and white, which means a lot of grays. You could think of this as no saturation. If I did a full color House Factorable, I could desaturate it and make it all black and white. So, we're looking for a red. There's a million frickin' reds out there, let's pick one. And let's surround it by orange. And this one by purple, blue, whatever this color is. And holy crap, they look like different reds. Not really, but we know they're the same red because we've been here since the beginning. And this is because color is relative. We perceive things differently depending on what's nearby. But the real issue here is that one is fine enough to look at while the other one is eye-bleeding. That's not necessarily because of the hues chosen here. You could use a red with a purple and not want to look away. But the values here are the problem. And I'm going to get more into that later. Okay, so let's make this rectangle square into a circle. And the floor is purple. And this wall is yellow, and this other wall is a greenish blue, right? What's the circle look like? Now let's make this a sphere. Not a flat circle, but give dimensions so that light is going to bounce. We're not even talking about light sources. A separate thing entirely. We're just saying the color reflects, even if the surface isn't reflective. So what does that do here? And I'm going to exaggerate everything to get my point across here, but you'll get it. You can check out a color wheel to see where colors land by each other, like purple versus blue and what's across from the other. If you want to push something into the background, you can make the object closer in value and saturation to what's around it, like pushing trees into the back. Something I've struggled with over the years is wanting to make everything bright, and every bit have the same amount of detail, even when things aren't the focus of the piece. Don't be like me, kids. Let far away stuff feel far away. I got around this a little bit with Oh Heldana by making backgrounds watercolor, while the foreground and the characters were colored digitally. This forced the background to be softer by comparison. I was then able to apply what I learned in later pieces. Every single big project I do, I learn more, and then it gets harder to look at that old piece, but I learned things, and then I move on. So, let's talk about choosing a color palette. Thumbnails can actually help here, because when you're looking far away, you can see the general chunks of color and what they're going to look like together, without the context of the detail itself. So you've got your color wheel, where you have your red, blue, and yellow, and then color between them for purple, green, and orange, so on and so forth. Because that's what happens when the colors get together. And then you can make more and more by adding the colors on either side again and again. Let's look at a basic color wheel, just the hues, and then we can go from there. Types of color palettes. Monochromatic, same hue, different tones, tints, shades, and values. Again, how sprite durable is this? Analogous, you've got your main color you've chosen, and then it needs some friends. So you're just gathering some nearby neighbors. Like when you're a kid with no friends and your mom needs to have you not be alone on your birthday, so she invites your whole class, whether you're actually friends or not. The colors are the colors nearby. You could even get spicy and bring over blue's cousin, a slightly blue-green, right along with a slightly yellow-green. Things close on the color wheel. Complementary is when you finally get your internet friend who lives on the other side of the country to come over for a convention. Blue and orange, red and green, yada yada. The opposite side of the color wheel. Also different tints and such with that. Also, complementary is spelled with an E, not an I. Just general fun fact here. There's also split complementary, where you're getting your two friends from across the country who don't necessarily know each other too well to come on over. So you might want to poke around a bit to get the right balance with that one. Either way, you're not going for straight across with this one. Triadic. Tri meaning 3. Pick a spot on the color wheel, and then find the other 2 that are equal spaces apart. You've sliced your pie into 3 equal parts. I suggest chilling 1 or 2 of the colors out by adding a tint and white to them, or just using different amounts of the colors in whatever your piece is. Also, just pointing out, the color wheel I've drawn here is very wonky, and sometimes the color wheel is literally just red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. So, there's that. The math is going to change. All of these will be different depending on the wheel you're using, and you'll need to use your own judgment here. All of these tips and tricks are guidelines. They're rules to learn so that you can bend them. You can do a square instead of a triangle here too. Adding the same equally spaced thing, but with 4 instead of 3. This is a tetrad. Triad versus tetrad. The rectangle tetradic palette would be similar but not equally apart. Think 2 complementary pairs. This is one of my favorite ways to pick colors, actually. You pick a color, the opposite color on the other side, and then go off by 2 or so, again, depending on your wheel, for each to get a buddy. So you got blue and orange, and blue brings purple as 8, and then orange brings yellow. Again, to see the values, just make it all black and white. Then you can see if the silhouette is readable. This will come up again in my character design video, but it's good to keep in mind for general composition too. Even lineless, you want clear borders between objects to avoid everything going muddy. So let's look at these colors, all very saturated, in black and white. One way to do this is to turn the saturation all the way down, if you're working digitally. Though with Clip Studio at least, I like to make a new layer, fill that layer black, and then set the layer to color, which does the same thing, and it's easy to turn off by hiding that layer. I think it looks nicer. I think that it's more true to what these values actually would be. I don't know if that's just in my head or not. And, look at that! These, over here, have the same value. That's important to keep in mind. What colors are in the lightest category versus the darkest? And let's give them their color back. So let's do an exercise using this technique. Everything black and white again. This is our palette. I'm going to draw a face. I'm not using reference, so I'm just going to draw Dead Ray. A character I drew for 13 years, and he's cartoony. Also, I didn't record a speed drawing part because I can't actually select the colors while still black and white. It would just select as the gray. So it would have gone back and forth really fast and been even harder to look at. So just trust me that I did the process. So what happens, looking at our lovely Dead Ray head now, when we put the color back? Now that's not to say that you can never use similar values in different hues. This actually looks kind of cool. Again, rules are meant to be broken. Once you have the basics down, you can more easily play and understand why things are working the way they are. This red and this hot pink over here were pretty close in value in black and white. And if you use one with just a hint of the other on the edge, or like a bit of a bounced, like from something nearby, bit of color, this can create an interesting vibrating kind of effect on the eye. You could do a piece in similar values, and then go back in to highlight and pick out the parts you want to emphasize too. Either way, experiment! Also remember to zoom out to see the whole picture in more than one sense. And that's all I've got on color theory for now. But let me know in the comments if there's anything more you'd like me to cover. Rock on!